The day I poured $47,000 into the gutter, my HOA president folded her arms and smiled, like she was watching a lesson finally sink in. Water rushed past my driveway in a shimmering wave, racing toward the storm drain at the end of the cul-de-sac. Neighbors stood frozen on their lawns. Phones were out. No one spoke. Across the fence, Cynthia Holloway adjusted her sunglasses and said, almost sweetly, "You should have just shared it, Aaron." Shared it. Like the pool hadn't cost me 18 months of overtime shifts, scraped knuckles, and every spare dollar I had after my divorce. Like it wasn't the one place my kids still laughed without tension hanging in the air. 3 days earlier, she'd shown up at my door with a clipboard and a polished smile. "Per the community enhancement clause," she'd said, tapping the paper, "your pool now qualifies as shared recreational property. You'll provide access to all 72 homes or face $500 per day in fines." I actually laughed at first. I thought it was a prank. It wasn't. So I did exactly what her letter demanded. I decommissioned the structure. The drain valve groaned open. The water thundered out. $47,000 disappeared in front of everyone. Cynthia thought she'd forced me into submission. She didn't realize I had cameras rolling, documents printed, and a surprise waiting for her at the next HOA meeting. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Gone Wild, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? My name is Aaron Whitfield. I'm 49 years old, and until recently, I thought the hardest thing I would ever survive was my divorce. I live in Briar Hollow, a neat little subdivision tucked just outside Redfield County, Missouri, the kind of place where every lawn is edged on Saturdays and every mailbox matches. It looks peaceful from the outside, structured, orderly, safe. After my marriage ended, weekends with my kids felt like walking on cracked ice. Madison was 16, old enough to see through everything. Tyler was 14, quiet in a way that worried me. We loved each other. That wasn't the issue. The issue was the silence. The feeling that our time together had an expiration date every Sunday night. I needed something steady, something that wasn't divided by custody schedules or court paperwork, something that felt permanent. So I built a pool. Not some luxury showpiece. No waterfall, no glowing fountains, just a simple in-ground rectangle with clean lines, steel-reinforced walls, and safety rails. I spent 18 months planning it. I handled the permits myself. I triple-checked zoning codes. I scheduled inspections early. I made sure every inch was compliant. It cost me $47,000, almost all of my savings. When the final county inspector signed off, I felt proud in a way I hadn't felt in years. That Saturday was the first time Madison laughed freely since the divorce. Tyler actually invited a friend over. The tension eased. For the first time, our backyard didn't feel like leftover space. It felt like ours. 3 days later, Cynthia Holloway knocked on my door. Cynthia had been HOA president for 4 consecutive terms. She was in her late 50s, always perfectly dressed, always holding a clipboard like it was part of her arm. Before retiring, she'd been a mortgage officer. She carried herself like she still approved or denied people's lives. She smiled when I opened the door. "Well, Aaron," she said, glancing past me toward the yard. "It looks beautiful." "Thank you," I replied, still riding that post-inspection high. She stepped back, lifted her clipboard, and her tone shifted from neighborly to official. "Unfortunately, we have a situation." That's never a good sentence. She explained that Briar Hollow had no central recreational facility, no clubhouse, no community pool. According to her, the architectural guidelines included a community enhancement clause that allowed the association to designate certain improvements as shared amenities if they benefited overall property value. I blinked at her. What does that have to do with me? She didn't blink back. Your pool qualifies. For a second, I genuinely thought she was joking. I even gave a short laugh. She didn't. You'll need to provide reasonable access to residents, she continued calmly. We can work out a schedule. Otherwise, you'll be in violation. In violation of what? I asked. Non-compliance with a community designation. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. Then she said it. Failure to comply will result in fines of $500 per day. The air changed. I asked her to show me where that was written. She flipped through her binder and tapped a paragraph buried in a dense page of bylaws. The language was vague. Something about enhancements that materially contribute to shared neighborhood value. Hey, that applies to common property, I said. Parks, entrances, not my fenced backyard. She gave me a small, almost patient smile. Interpretation falls under board discretion. In board discretion. In other words, her discretion. I told her I'd review the documents and get back to her. She nodded, like a banker granting me time before foreclosure, and walked back down my driveway. That night, after Madison and Tyler went home to their mom's place, I sat at my kitchen table with a printed copy of the HOA bylaws. I read every page. The clause existed, but it clearly referenced improvements on association land, not privately owned lots. My property was deeded solely to me. Taxes paid by me, maintained by me, insured by me. There was no language anywhere stating the HOA could seize usage rights of a private structure. I slept easier after reading that. The next morning, I opened my email. There it was. A formal notice of pending community designation, and a warning that fines would begin in 7 days if I failed to submit an access plan for residents. 7 days. I felt irritation at first, then disbelief. Then something colder. I called the HOA management number. Cynthia answered directly. I'm not opening my backyard to 72 households, I said evenly. There's no legal basis for that. She didn't argue. Instead, she said, we're only trying to ensure fairness. It wouldn't look good if you refused to contribute to community harmony. A community harmony. That phrase stuck with me. By the end of the week, a printed notice was taped to my door stating that daily fines would begin the following Monday. $500 per day. I did the math. That's $3,500 per week. Over $100,000 in a year. More than the pool itself. Madison saw the letter when she came over that Friday. Dad, they can't do that, right? She asked. I wanted to say no instantly. I wanted to reassure her without hesitation. Instead, I said, we're going to figure it out. That night, I reread the bylaws again. My backyard was not common property, but Cynthia was acting like it already was. And that's when the letters started arriving daily, each one a little more formal, a little more threatening than the last. The fines started on Monday morning at 8 sharp, $500. By Tuesday, it was $1,000. By Friday, I owed the HOA more money in penalties than most people's monthly mortgage. The number sat in my online resident portal like a countdown clock. Every time I refreshed the page, I felt my jaw tighten, but the fines were just the beginning. On Wednesday, I received a notice about non-compliant patio furniture. Apparently, my outdoor chairs were a shade darker than the approved tan listed in the design guidelines. I had owned those chairs for 4 years. They'd never been an issue. On Thursday, a warning appeared about my mailbox being off shade by visible margin. I stood in the driveway staring at it, holding the printed violation letter in one hand, comparing beige tones like I was studying paint samples in a hardware store. Friday brought an anonymous noise complaint filed with the county. The complaint claimed I was hosting late-night gatherings with excessive splashing and shouting. The only people who had used the pool were Madison and Tyler. It wasn't enforcement. It was pressure. Administrative suffocation. Every envelope in my mailbox made my chest tighten. Every email notification felt like another small shove toward compliance. Then Madison overheard something that changed the tone completely. She had been walking home from a friend's house when she passed Cynthia chatting with another neighbor near the community entrance. Madison slowed when she heard my name. "He'll fold," Cynthia said casually. "They always fold." That sentence hit harder than the fines. They always fold. Not, "We're trying to protect property values." Not, "We're interpreting the bylaws." Just pressure until submission. Madison told me that night while we were washing dishes. I didn't say much at first, but something shifted inside me. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about being tested. I emailed the HOA board requesting a formal hearing, as outlined in the dispute resolution section of the bylaws. I cited the exact page number. I asked for a recorded meeting and a written explanation of how a private structure could be reclassified without a vote. Cynthia responded the next morning. "Your hearing request is denied. You have already been notified of the violation." Denied. The bylaws clearly allowed for homeowner hearings before fines accumulated beyond a certain threshold. She ignored that clause entirely. By then, the total fines had passed $3,000. Saturday morning, I went outside to skim leaves from the pool and found it silent. The pump wasn't running. At first, I assumed a mechanical issue. I checked the filter. Nothing obvious. Then I walked to the breaker panel mounted on the side of the house. The switch controlling the pool pump had been flipped off. From the outside, I stood there staring at it longer than I should have. Kids didn't do that. My kids knew better. And even if they had, they would have told me. The breaker box wasn't locked. It had never needed to be. Until now. I flipped it back on and watched the pump hum to life. But the feeling in my stomach didn't go away. That afternoon, I drove to the hardware store and bought a lock for the panel. Then I ordered 3 outdoor security cameras. If this was going to become a game of pressure, I wanted documentation. Installing the cameras felt surreal. I mounted one facing the driveway, one along the side yard, and one aimed directly at the back fence line. For the first few nights, nothing happened. Then on Thursday evening, just after 10, my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I opened the app. There she was. Cynthia Holloway, walking slowly along the outside perimeter of my fence. Not entering, not touching anything, just walking, pausing, looking through the slats toward the water. Her posture wasn't frantic or angry. It was evaluative, like she was inspecting inventory. I replayed the clip 3 times. Technically, she wasn't trespassing. She stayed on the sidewalk. But it didn't feel neighborly. It felt strategic. The next morning, another notice appeared in my inbox. Unapproved exterior lighting glare affecting adjacent properties. My pool lights had been on for exactly 30 minutes the previous night. 30 minutes. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the pattern. Fines, petty violations, denied hearing, anonymous complaints, power interference, surveillance of my property. This wasn't random enforcement. It was escalation designed to exhaust me. Tyler noticed the tension one evening when I was quieter than usual. "Dad," he said carefully, "why don't you just let them use it?" It wasn't a challenge. It was confusion. I looked at him and realized what was really at stake. If I folded now, I wasn't just giving up water in a backyard. I was teaching my kids that intimidation works. That authority doesn't need to follow rules. That if someone pressures you long enough, you hand over what's yours. That's what Cynthia believed. They always fold. The fines climbed past $5,000 by the end of the second week. Neighbors started avoiding eye contact. A few gave sympathetic looks but said nothing. No one wanted to get pulled into it. The tension stopped being just financial. It became psychological. Every time I heard footsteps outside at night, I checked the cameras. Every time my phone buzzed, I expected another violation. Cynthia wasn't yelling. She wasn't threatening directly. She didn't have to. She was tightening screws. And the way she paced along that fence line told me something important. She wasn't just trying to enforce a rule. She was waiting for me to break. By the third week, I realized this wasn't something I could outlast with stubbornness alone. The fines had passed $7,000. The violation notices were stacking up in a neat pile on my kitchen counter like unpaid parking tickets. So I did what I probably should have done sooner. I called an attorney. Lucas Bennett's office was above a small insurance agency in downtown Redfield County. Nothing flashy, no marble floors, just a brass nameplate and a waiting room that smelled faintly like coffee and printer ink. Lucas was in his early 40s, calm in the way people are when they've seen every version of a neighborhood dispute imaginable. I laid everything out in front of him: the bylaws, the violation notices, the fine ledger, the hearing denial email. He didn't interrupt, he just read. After about 20 minutes, he leaned back and tapped a specific paragraph in the printed bylaws. "This is the clause she's using. Community enhancement," I said. "That's her justification." He nodded slowly. "When did this language change?" "I don't know that it did." Lucas turned to his computer and pulled up the county's public record database. HOA amendments, like property covenants, had to be recorded with the county clerk to be enforceable. That part was basic nonprofit governance law. He searched the subdivision's filing history. Then he frowned. "There's no amendment recorded 2 years ago," he said. 2 years. "That's when this language appears to have been added," he replied, pointing to a slightly different font and formatting in the document I had provided. "The earlier version from 3 years ago doesn't contain this paragraph." I felt my pulse in my ears. "So what does that mean?" "It means," Lucas said carefully, "either the amendment was never properly recorded, or it was never formally approved." HOA bylaws couldn't just be rewritten because a board president decided to reinterpret them. Amendments required a vote, a quorum, documentation, filing. We searched the county system again. Nothing. No vote record, no amendment filing, no updated covenant. It looked like the clause Cynthia was using to threaten me had simply appeared. A unilateral rewrite. Lucas didn't jump to conclusions. He printed copies of both versions and circled the discrepancies. "This doesn't automatically win your case," he said, "but it's leverage. If she didn't follow procedure, enforcement becomes questionable." Questionable. That word felt like oxygen. As I was leaving his office, my phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. It read, "Have call me. This is about the HOA." The name that followed was Dana Ruiz. Dana lived 2 streets over. We had spoken maybe twice in passing. She was in her mid-30s, a single mom, worked remote in accounting. I called her from my truck. She didn't waste time. "I heard what's happening," she said quietly. "And you're not the only one who thinks something's off." "Off how?" I asked. "Our dues went up last year, remember? Supposedly for future facility improvements." I did remember. The increase had been small enough not to spark outrage. Framed as an investment. "There hasn't been a single improvement," Dana continued. "No clubhouse plans, no park construction. Nothing." "Maybe it's in reserves," I offered. "That's the problem," she said. "We can't see the reserves. According to the HOA's own policy, financial statements were supposed to be available to residents upon request. Dana had requested them. Twice. Both times she received vague summaries, not detailed ledgers, no receipts, no breakdowns. Cynthia says full statements are bored. Only documents, Dana told me. But that's not what the bylaws say. That night, I met Dana at a small diner off the highway. She brought printed emails, copies of dues notices, and the most recent budget summary. The numbers were round. Large categories labeled development research and consultation expenses. No specifics. Do you think she's stealing? I asked. I think she's hiding something, Dana replied. When I relayed this to Lucas the next day, he didn't look surprised. Control issues and financial opacity often travel together, he said. He advised patience. Don't confront her yet, he warned. Let's gather documentation first. If she's operating outside procedure, we want it airtight. Meanwhile, Cynthia shifted tactics. Instead of quiet pressure, she went public. At the next monthly HOA gathering, a casual meet and greet near the entrance sign, she addressed community tension. I wasn't there, but 3 neighbors later told me what she said. We have a homeowner refusing to contribute to community harmony, she announced, while others comply with guidelines for the good of Briar Hollow. She never said my name. She didn't need to. By the following week, I felt it. The sideways glances, the polite distance, the subtle chill at the mailbox, selfish, uncooperative. The narrative was being shaped, and then she made her mistake. A certified letter arrived on a Thursday afternoon. Official HOA letterhead, signature required. I opened it at my kitchen counter while Tyler worked on homework nearby. It was direct. Final notice. You are hereby required to either grant scheduled community access to the pool structure located on your property or decommission said structure within 14 days to avoid further enforcement action. Decommission. The word felt surgical. Either surrender it to 72 households or destroy it. Tyler looked up from the table. What does that mean? It means, I said slowly, she wants me to choose. I read the letter again. It wasn't vague. It wasn't conversational. It was an ultimatum. And unlike her earlier warnings, this one was precise. Specific. Signed. I scanned it immediately and emailed a copy to Lucas. His reply came within an hour. Good. This is what we needed. Needed, I asked when I called him. An overreach in writing, he said. Now it's not interpretation. It's documented coercion tied to a potentially invalid amendment. For the first time since this started, I felt something other than frustration, clarity. Cynthia had framed me as selfish, but in that letter she had revealed her hand. Grant access, or destroy your own property. She thought she was cornering me. What she didn't realize was that paper trails cut both ways. Most people expected me to stop paying. Neighbors assumed I'd refuse the fines out of principle. A few probably hoped I would. Non-payment would have given Cynthia the escalation she wanted. Liens, legal threats, public examples made out of me. Instead, I did something she didn't see coming. I paid every single fine. $500 per day. 7 days a week. I logged into the resident portal and clicked Submit Payment over and over again. The total crossed $10,000 before the month was over. But I didn't just pay them. I marked each one, paid under protest, in the memo line and saved confirmation receipts in a dedicated folder labeled HOA. Lucas approved immediately. Judges love paper trails, he told me. If this turns into litigation, you look cooperative, not defiant. Cynthia sent a short email after the third payment cleared. Thank you for resolving your compliance issues in good faith. Good faith. I almost laughed. The fines were still accumulating. I was simply refusing to give her the narrative of a reckless homeowner ignoring rules. If she wanted to frame me as unreasonable, she'd have to do it while cashing my checks. While the money left my account, Lucas drafted something more important, a formal records request under Missouri nonprofit disclosure law. The HOA was registered as a nonprofit corporation. That meant certain financial documents had to be accessible to members upon written demand. Detailed ledgers, vendor payments, reserve balances, and amendment records. We sent it certified. Cynthia responded 5 days later. Your request is under review. 2 weeks passed. Nothing. Lucas escalated with a formal demand letter citing statutory deadlines and potential penalties for noncompliance. That's when the tone shifted again. Meanwhile, something unexpected happened at home. Madison asked if she could explain what's going on her social media. I hesitated. I didn't want drama. I didn't want online mobs. I just wanted fairness. What would you say? I asked her. The truth, she replied. Her video was under 2 minutes long. No music. No crying. Just her sitting at our kitchen table explaining that her dad built a pool. The HOA claimed it as community property, and fines were stacking up unless he handed over access. She didn't name call. She didn't exaggerate. She ended it with, "It just doesn't seem right." We expected maybe a few friends to comment. Instead, it spread locally. Parents in neighboring subdivisions shared it. A community Facebook page reposted it. Someone tagged the Briar Hollow HOA page asking for clarification. Cynthia posted a short response the next day. The board is acting within its authority to protect neighborhood interests. Protect? That word again. But now the spotlight was shifting. 3 days later, Dana called me sounding breathless. I got it, she said. Got what? The ledger. They finally sent partial records after Lucas's second letter. We met at the same diner as before. Dana slid a thick stack of printed spreadsheets across the table. At first glance, it looked routine: landscaping costs, insurance, utility bills for entrance lighting. Then she pointed to a line item buried mid-page. Facility development research, $18,000. Paid in 2 installments the previous year. Research for what facility? I asked. That's the thing, she said. There's no approved project. The payment had gone to a small contracting company I'd never heard of. Dana had already done some digging. The contractor's registered address matched a residential property 2 towns over. The registered agent listed on the state business database was named Harold Keene. Dana turned her phone toward me. Recognize the last name? I didn't. That's Cynthia's maiden name, Dana said quietly. Her brother-in-law. The room felt smaller. You're sure? I asked. I checked property records. Harold Keene is married to Cynthia's sister. $18,000 labeled as research. No facility. No vote. No proposal presented to homeowners. Money redirected to a relative's company. I sat back and tried to process it. This wasn't about a community pool. It wasn't about shared space. It was about leverage. If the HOA created a narrative that Briar Hollow desperately needed recreational amenities, then my private pool became convenient. Either she gained access to it under the guise of community benefit, or she used the conflict to justify funneling funds into a future project controlled by someone close to her. Either way, she positioned herself as the gatekeeper. Lucas reviewed everything the next morning. If this contractor performed no documented service, he said, and funds were transferred without proper disclosure, that's serious. Serious like mismanagement? I asked. Serious like breach of fiduciary duty, he replied. The board had a legal obligation to act in the best interest of members. Directing funds to relatives without transparent approval crossed lines. But Lucas warned me not to go public yet. We need confirmation. Receipts. Scope of work. Something that shows whether this was legitimate or fabricated. Meanwhile, Cynthia continued her public campaign. She posted a notice on the community bulletin board reminding residents that selfish resistance to shared values undermines property appreciation. Selfish resistance. The fines on my account had reached nearly $15,000. But now, for the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was observing. She thought the pool was the battlefield. It wasn't. The real fight was about authority without oversight. That night, Tyler asked if we were going to lose the house. No, I said firmly. Madison looked at me across the table. Are you going to drain it? She asked quietly. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I opened my laptop and created a new folder. Evidence. Because at that point I understood something clearly. The pool was never about recreation. It was leverage. And if Cynthia wanted to weaponize it, I was going to make sure every dollar, every signature, and every decision tied to her board was exposed under bright light. The emergency meeting notice went out on a Sunday evening. Special session to address community tension and property compliance concerns. No names, no details. But everyone in Briar Hollow knew exactly what it was about. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 7 in the evening inside the small multipurpose room at the Redfield County Community Church. By 6:30, the parking lot was nearly full. Neighbors who had barely made eye contact with me for weeks were suddenly curious enough to show up early. Standing room only. I walked in with Lucas on my right and a slim black folder tucked under my arm. Dana was already seated near the middle, flipping through printed pages. Cynthia stood at the front beside a folding table, wearing a navy blazer and that same measured smile she always wore when she thought she controlled the narrative. She opened the meeting with a light tap of her pen against a glass. Thank you all for coming, she began smoothly. We cannot allow rogue structures to divide Briar Hollow. Rogue structures. That was how she chose to frame my backyard pool. This board exists to preserve property values and shared harmony, she continued. Unfortunately, when one homeowner resists community standards, it forces us into difficult enforcement decisions. A few murmurs rippled through the room. She never said my name. She didn't need to. When she opened the floor for comments, I stood. No raised voice. No dramatic gestures, just steady. I'd like to respond, I said. Cynthia's smile tightened slightly. Keep it brief, Aaron. I nodded. Lucas handed me a small portable projector. I connected it to my laptop and aimed it at the blank wall behind Cynthia's table. The first document appeared. The so-called Community Enhancement Amendment. This is the clause being used to justify daily fines of $500, I said calmly. It appears to have been added 2 years ago. I clicked to the next slide. A certified copy of the county's official records search. There is no recorded amendment filed with Redfield County reflecting this change. The room grew quieter. Cynthia straightened. Internal board revisions are not required to be filed in that manner. Lucas stepped forward slightly but said nothing. I clicked again. The certified ultimatum letter. Grant community access or decommission the structure. I let the words sit there. This letter was issued without a formal hearing. I continued. Despite bylaws guaranteeing homeowners the right to dispute enforcement actions. Someone in the back whispered. Is that true? Cynthia's voice sharpened. The homeowner was notified multiple times. Not heard. I replied evenly. Not heard. Then I clicked to the third slide. A cropped section of the financial ledger Dana had uncovered. Facility development research, $18,000. I turned to face the room. Can anyone here tell me what facility that research produced? Silence. Cynthia's composure wavered for the first time. That expense was approved by the board, she said quickly. It is not relevant to tonight's discussion. It's directly relevant, I replied, because the same board claiming authority over private property has failed to provide transparent financial reporting. She stepped forward, her voice rising. This is defamation. There it was, the word she hoped would scare me. Dana stood up from her chair. If it's defamation, she said clearly, then open the books. Every head turned toward her. She held up a printed copy of the HOA policy stating members were entitled to inspect financial records upon request. You've delayed disclosure for months, Dana continued. Why? Cynthia's jaw tightened. Financial documents are complex and require proper context. Then provide the context. Dana shot back. Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then stronger. Cynthia looked around the room and realized something important. The narrative was slipping. She shifted tactics again. This meeting, she said firmly, is about restoring unity. Mr. Whitfield has refused to cooperate with reasonable requests that benefit the entire subdivision. I felt Lucas glance at me. It was time. I closed the laptop slowly. You're right, I said. The room quieted instantly. Cynthia blinked. I will comply with your ultimatum. Oh, for a split second, confusion crossed her face. Then her smile returned, measured, victorious. I'm glad you've reconsidered, she said smoothly. It's in everyone's best interest. A few neighbors looked relieved. A few looked disappointed. Some looked confused. Dana stared at me, searching my expression. I didn't elaborate. I'll follow the terms exactly as written, I added calmly. As stated in your certified notice. Cynthia nodded, satisfied. Then we can consider this matter resolved, she said, tapping her pen again against the glass. But I wasn't finished. I'll also expect full compliance from the board regarding financial transparency moving forward, I said, since we're all committed to harmony. Her smile flickered. The meeting adjourned shortly after. People filed out in clusters, whispering. A few neighbors clapped me on the shoulder. Others avoided eye contact altogether. Outside, the night air felt heavier than usual. Dana caught up to me near my truck. What are you doing? She asked under her breath. Following her instructions, I said. Lucas looked at me carefully but didn't question it. Cynthia walked past us toward her car, heels clicking against the pavement. I knew you'd come around, she said softly as she passed. This doesn't have to be ugly. I held her gaze. No, I replied. It doesn't. She drove off with the confidence of someone who believed pressure had worked again. They always fold. That's what she had said. As I pulled into my driveway later that night, I stood at the edge of the pool and looked at the water reflecting the porch light. Comply with the ultimatum. Grant access. Or decommission the structure. Her exact words. I had chosen. And she had no idea what that actually meant. I didn't announce it on social media. I didn't post flyers. I simply knocked on a few doors. Saturday, noon. My backyard. I told anyone willing to listen. You might want to see this. Word spreads fast in a subdivision built on curiosity. By 11:45, small clusters of neighbors were standing along my driveway and lining the sidewalk beside my fence. No signs. No shouting. Just quiet anticipation. Dana stood near the gate, arms folded. Lucas leaned against his car, a thick envelope tucked under one arm. Madison held her phone steady. Tyler stood beside her, unusually serious. At exactly noon, I stepped into the yard. The water looked calm blue, perfectly still under the sun. For a brief second, I felt it, that flicker of doubt. 18 months of work. $47,000. The one place my kids had laughed without weight on their shoulders. Then I remembered the certified letter. Grant community access, or decommission the structure. I reached down and turned the main drain valve. It resisted at first, then it gave. A deep mechanical groan echoed from beneath the decking, followed by a violent rush of water through the drainage line. Within seconds, a heavy stream burst from the outlet pipe near the curb, flooding into the street. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The water roared down the asphalt, catching sunlight in flashing waves as it rushed toward the storm drain at the end of the cul-de-sac. $47,000. Gone. By 12:05, Cynthia's SUV screeched to a stop near the curb. She stepped out fast, sunglasses on, heels sharp against pavement. "What are you doing?" she demanded, striding toward the fence. I didn't raise my voice. "I'm complying." Her face flushed red. "You're destroying community property." There it was, said out loud. Cameras caught it. "No," I replied calmly. "I'm decommissioning my private structure, exactly as stated in your written demand." I held up a laminated copy of the letter. Some neighbors leaned closer. She hesitated, realizing too late how this looked. "You're being dramatic," she snapped. "We were negotiating access." "Your letter wasn't a negotiation," I said evenly. "It was an ultimatum." The water kept pouring. The shallow end began to reveal its pale concrete floor as the level dropped inch by inch. Cynthia's voice grew sharper. "Turn it off immediately. This is wasteful and irresponsible." Lucas stepped forward then, opening the thick envelope he'd been holding. "Before we continue," he said calmly, "we have something to distribute." He handed printed copies to the nearest neighbors, who passed them back through the crowd. Financial ledgers, bank transfers, vendor registration documents, highlighted sections circled in yellow. "Earlier this week," Lucas continued, "we issued a final statutory demand for full financial disclosure. This morning, we received complete records." Dana's voice cut through from the side. Page 3. Pages flipped. Murmurs began. "Facility development research, $18,000. Lucas continued. "The contractor paid for that research is registered to Harold Keene." He held up another document. "Mr. Keene is the brother-in-law of Cynthia Holloway." The silence that followed was heavier than the rushing water. Cynthia's expression hardened. "That was approved by the board." "Show the vote record," Dana called out. Lucas clicked a button on a small portable projector connected to a battery pack in his trunk. A scanned copy of meeting minutes appeared on the side of my garage, or rather, the absence of them. "There is no recorded vote authorizing this expenditure," Lucas said calmly. "Additionally, the amendment being used to justify community seizure of private property was never filed with Redfield County." Another document flashed onto the wall. The county clerk's certification of no record. The crowd shifted physically, like a tide turning. Someone near the back muttered, "You said it was legal." Cynthia's authority, the crisp posture, the controlled tone, began to crack. "You're twisting facts," she said sharply. "This is harassment." "No," I replied quietly. "This is transparency." The deep end steps were visible now. The water level had dropped nearly a foot. A man I barely knew, Tom from Maple Court, looked down at the papers in his hand and shook his head. "Why wasn't this shared before?" he asked. No answer. A woman near the sidewalk raised her voice. "We've been paying higher dues for what, exactly?" Then it happened. One clap. Slow. Measured. Another joined. Then another. The sound spread, not celebratory, not mocking, but decisive. Cynthia looked around at faces she'd led for years. The polite deference was gone. In its place was doubt. "You can't just drain it," she said weakly. "This affects everyone." I looked at the exposed concrete floor of the shallow end. "You told me to choose," I said calmly. I chose. The water continued its relentless rush down the street, carrying leaves and small debris along with it. Cynthia stepped back from the fence. For the first time since this began, she looked uncertain. Not angry, not commanding, uncertain. Neighbors weren't looking at me anymore. They were looking at her. Questions forming, connections clicking into place. The narrative had flipped. This wasn't about a selfish homeowner refusing to share. It was about a board president who had overreached, rewritten rules, and quietly redirected funds. The roar of draining water became background noise to something louder, trust collapsing. By 12:30, the pool floor was fully exposed. $47,000 sat empty under the sun. But something else had filled the space. Clarity. Cynthia adjusted her sunglasses one last time and turned toward her SUV without another word. As she drove away, the applause wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Her authority had evaporated in real time, and everyone had seen it happen. The weeks that followed were quieter than anyone expected, yet heavier with lessons than any shouting match could teach. Cynthia's resignation came first. She left with a stiff smile and a practiced nod, the kind that hides as much as it reveals. The board, shaken by months of missteps and half-baked decisions, moved quickly to undo the amendment that had stirred so much chaos. It was a vote, a formal stroke of a pen, that quietly restored balance. And yet it carried the weight of 1,000 whispered what-ifs. A forensic audit was next. Papers shuffled, spreadsheets scrutinized, emails dissected. Every corner of the HOA's finances was laid bare, not for spectacle, not for drama, but for truth. In the end, there were no headlines, no arrests, no flashing lights. Just consequences, calm, precise, inevitable consequences that reminded everyone involved that actions have weight, even when no one is watching. The dues, once a constant source of tension, were frozen. Families breathed easier. Arguments over what was fair and what was required softened into quiet conversations over summer barbecues and neighborhood walks. Children ran through yards, unbothered by the silent tension that had hung over the community like a heavy, gray cloud. The pool, which had been a focal point of both contention and pride, became a symbol of rebirth. Rebuilt with care, updated landscaping softened its edges, and higher fencing provided both security and privacy. The space looked different, cleaner, and yet it felt the same, a place meant for enjoyment rather than conflict. Then came the moment no one expected. I, who had spent countless hours navigating disputes, drafting letters, and walking property lines, opened the pool one Saturday in the summer. No announcement, no fanfare, no obligation. I simply turned the key, filled the air with the smell of chlorine and warm sunlight, and watched as kids from the neighborhood splashed and laughed. Their joy was immediate, unguarded. The ripple of happiness across their faces reminded me of something fundamental. Consent changes everything. It shifts the energy from conflict to cooperation, from tension to possibility. Parents came and stayed for a while, watching their children, talking quietly to neighbors they hadn't spoken to in months. There were smiles, small gestures of reconciliation, nods of acknowledgement that no official meeting could have forced. The pool, once a symbol of division, became a quiet bridge between people who had simply lost track of common ground. Each laugh, each cannonball, each splash was a subtle, unspoken contract. We are neighbors first. We are guardians second. The proceeds from that single open day were donated directly to the local middle school swim program. It wasn't about recognition or applause. No one took pictures. No one posted on social media. It was about creating a space where rules mattered less than opportunity, where the community mattered more than ego. Watching the children swim, seeing their strokes confident and free, I realized how small acts, done voluntarily and without expectation, could resonate far beyond a single summer day. The lesson extended beyond the pool, beyond the audit reports and board meetings. It seeped into conversations at the mailbox, casual nods during morning walks, shared tools left on the curb for neighbors to borrow. People began to see the difference between compliance and commitment. Compliance is fear, commitment is choice. Consent is the bridge between them, the invisible but undeniable force that allows communities to heal. Evenings grew long, the sun sliding over rooftops and lawns, casting golden streaks across yards that had once been battlegrounds. Children's laughter echoed into twilight, a reminder that joy can return to spaces that were once tense. I often found myself standing at the edge of the pool, arms crossed, a faint smile tugging at the corners of my mouth, watching life continue in a rhythm that had nothing to do with bylaws or fines. It was organic, real, and profoundly human, and the board, they shifted to slowly, as if realizing that their authority was not in their positions, but in the trust they cultivated. Meetings became more about listening than directing, about understanding the nuances of neighbors' lives rather than enforcing abstract rules. Tensions didn't vanish overnight, but they softened, replaced by conversations that were patient and deliberate. People began to talk about shared interests rather than conflicts, about future community projects rather than past mistakes. I understood then that the fallout had been less about punishment and more about clarity. The world had presented us with consequences, not to shame us, but to guide us. Rules mattered, but the human element mattered more. Respect mattered. Consent mattered. And in that space, choices mattered more than power, more than authority, more than fear. That one Saturday became a tradition of quiet generosity, a subtle marker of what was possible when people opted in rather than being forced. It reminded us all that the most meaningful changes don't always come from dramatic interventions or public scrutiny. Sometimes they come from a single act of voluntary action, from stepping aside and letting people feel welcome, safe, and empowered. And in those ripples of joy, in the smiles and the splashes, the neighborhood discovered its own way forward. Gentle, deliberate, and profoundly alive. The pool no longer belonged to me or the board. It belonged to the community. And in that belonging, everything shifted. Consent, I realized, isn't just permission. It's the spark that transforms conflict into connection, rules into relationships, and spaces into homes. The summer ended, but the echoes remained. Children carried lessons in teamwork and trust. Adults carried lessons in patience and humility. And I carried the knowledge that sometimes the simplest gestures, opening a gate, sharing a space, offering choice, can outlast bylaws, audits, and amendments. They create legacy, they create peace, they create possibility. The HOA learned that weekend what textbooks and legal opinions never could, that the real power in community isn't in control, but in the generosity of consent, the courage to step aside, and the wisdom to know when letting go is the most effective form of leadership. And so, life returned to normal, but subtly, beautifully transformed. The fallout was not a disaster, it was an awakening. A reminder that consequences, when met with integrity, can lead not to division, but to unity. And that sometimes, the quietest actions make the loudest impact. I didn't drain my pool out of spite or frustration. I drained it because control without accountability is like water left unchecked. It seeps, it spreads, and eventually it overflows. Cynthia treated rules like weapons, tools to push and punish. She forgot that rules are also records, footprints of responsibility, proof of what's expected and what's been ignored. The truth is, HOAs aren't inherently evil. They can serve communities, protect property, and maintain order. But power left unchecked, wielded without transparency, can twist good intentions into conflict. That's the lesson I learned on my grandfather's land, amid spreadsheets, amendments, and heated board meetings. Authority is fragile when divorced from accountability. My kids still swim in that pool every weekend they're with me. Their laughter, unguarded and free, reminds me why it's important to keep spaces safe, fair, and shared. When neighbors come by for the annual open day, they knock first. They ask, they respect, they consent. Respect feels different than enforcement. It builds connection, not resentment. It transforms rules from barriers into bridges. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button on HOA Gone Wild. and I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop it in the comments. Every neighborhood has its story, and the ripple of accountability and respect can start anywhere, even with something as simple as opening a pool gate.